concept that we are going to look at is the contextual selectors. So contextual selectors, they specify the context under which a particular page element is being matched. So the context is based on a parent element containing one or more child elements within it. So for example, and we can write the parent, descendant, and then the style that we have in there. So for instance, the header, the H1 can have the text, the style in it color red, which that red is basically nested within the header element. So the context is basically based on the hierarchical structure of a document, which involves the relationship between a parent and a child element, as I have mentioned. So let's look at some of the contextual selectors that are out there. So you can see these selectors, and so you can see the description for each of them. To match any element, a wildcard selector with asterisk is being used. So you can see in here the article that we have here. This style rule matches every child of the article element, setting the text color blue for it. So every child of the article element will have color blue. We have other selector called sibling selectors, which are being used to select elements based on elements that are adjacent to them in the document hierarchy. So, for example, we can use the style rule, the plus sign here, to select H2 element, but only if it's immediately preceded by an H1 element. So in here we have H1 plus H2 color elements, which if you look at it here, we can use this. Matches element 2 that is immediately preceded by the sibling element 1, which in this case we have the header 1 plus the header 2, and then the style is the blue. Selectors can also be defined based on attributes and attribute values within the elements. There are two attributes, ID and class, that are often being used. We remember we talked about the ID attributes. The ID identify specific elements within that document. To apply, we can put the pound sign and the ID, or we can use the selector, the LM, pound sign, and ID, where the ID is basically the value of the ID attribute and LM is the name of the element which we are going to use. So the ID is supposed to be unique. So that's why we want to make sure that the IDs are unique. Sometimes it's better to use the element name because that makes it that you know where which location we are talking about. So it kind of removes the confusion. So let's look at one of these examples. So we have the example here with the ID called title, and then we have this, and you can have it as the pound title or H1 title in the CSS file. Since two ID cannot be the same, therefore we can use class attributes. As we have mentioned, class is basically identifies a group of elements that they have similar characteristic or property. To select elements based on the class value, we can put the element.class. So in this case, we have defined the class intro, and also for the header and for the P. So the element, the h1.intro, and then we can put the style that we want in there. So we can actually have it like this. So each ID is actually unique. Here are the list of attribute selector with the examples and the description. As you can see, some of them have the CSS tree. So these are basically they might not be supported by older browsers. So these are actually the newer one. So let's look at the fonts now. How can we work with the fonts? So typography is basically the art of designing the appearance of characters and letters on the page. Color and fonts are basically some of the few properties that in the CSS family of typographical styles. So let's look at choosing the font. Text characters are basically based on fonts that define the style and appearance of each character in the alphabet. The general structure for defining a file is basically font, family, column, fonts, where fonts is a comma-separated list, also known as font stacks. So this is the example of the body having these font family. These are the font name, the generic name, as we can have them here like that, and we put them by comma. So a specific font is identified by name and based on font definition file that is stored in the user's computer or accessible on the web. Generic fonts describe the general appearance of the character in the text, but they don't specify any particular font definition in the file. So it supports the font group serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. So the generic file, the example of the serif would be Times New Roman and Georgia. So basically the characteristic would be finishing the strokes at the end of each line making up a character. They are best being used for headings on the computer screen, and sans serif on the other hand is Arial and Tahoma. Monospace, for example, is Courier, New Lucida. And cursive is basically Comic Sans is one. Fantasy is Papyrus or Impact. These are the examples of the fonts that belong to these different groups. So because these available fonts, they are basically varies by operating system and device, it's better to use web-safe font stacks. These are basically the web-safe font stacks that we can use. So these are the generic ones that you can use for web-safe font stacks, and I would suggest you to use these. We have other option, web fonts. Because the web-safe fonts limit our choices to select number of fonts that have universal support, another approach is using the web font, which are defined. It's supplied to the browser in an external file because of the limitation of the web-safe. So the web font format, you can have them as you can see here in each of the browser. So web file can be downloaded from several sites on the internet. In some cases, you must pay for it, or you can use it, but you cannot use it for commercial purposes. So one of the great advantages of the web font is that it gives the author more control over the font that is used in the document. But there is a disadvantage. The disadvantage is become, as you say, you have to pay for it, and also that you have to you have another file that from the browser to download, adding the time required to render the page. This can be a very big issue for the mobile devices, especially. So the generic syntax to include the web font is at font, face, and then we have the font family, the name, then we have the source, and then we have the description, and then the value. So you can have the font face here, the family, for example, Gentium, and then you can have the URL of the format in there, and another one, and then the description or value that you want to have. So, for example, the description value could be font weight, and the value could be bold. So the descriptor one could be font weight, and then the value one could be font bold, for example, or any other value that you might need to put. To set a font size, you can use the style property. So you can use font size, column size. So this is basically the syntax for it, where size is a CSS unit of length in either relative or absolute units. So these two type of units are available. Absolute unit is a fixed size in size regardless of the output device that are used, only with printed media. Relative unit express relative to the size or of other object within the page or to the display property of the device itself. This could be an example of absolute size, and this could be an example of relative size. So we are going to talk about what is the EM. So in this case, the relative size, we are using the 1.7 EM. So that's the relative size we are using. So the text is made scalable with all font sizes expressed relative to the default font size. So there are three relative measurements we can use: percentage EM unit, or rem or root EM unit. So both the EM unit and percentage, they ask the same way, expressing font size relative to the font size of the parent elements. So you can put the font size column to EM or 200% or something like that. Viewpoint unit is another relative unit in which lengths are expressed as percentage of the width or height of the browser window. So CSS introduced 4 viewpoints, as you can see in here. 1 VW, 1% of the browser's window width, 1 VH, 1% of the browser window height, 1 V min, 1 VW or 1 VH, whichever is smaller, and 1 V max, whichever is larger. So if the value of the browser window is 1400 pixel, 1% of that would be 14 pixel. So when we are comparing it to the browser window height or width. Another way, sizing keywords. Font size are being expressed using the keywords x small, small, medium, and so on. So we are using the keywords for sizing. So how do we do controlling spacing and indentation with CSS? Kerning measures the amount of space between the characters, while tracking measures the amount of space between the words. The properties to control an element's kerning and trackings are basically like this: letter spacing value and word spacing value. The value is basically the size of the space between individual letters, or in the word spacing, individual words. You can specify the size with the same unit that we use for the font sizing. So same unit can apply here. The default value for both kerning and tracking is 0 pixel. A positive value increases the letter spacing or word spacing, while a negative value reduces the space between the letters and words. So let's look at the example here. So in this example, we have word spacing and we are using the EM. As I said, you can use the same kind of a value that we have defined, either as percentage or as using the EM. Leading measures the amount of spacing between line of text and is set using this syntax: line height equals size. Text spacing can be also controlled by setting the indentation for the first line of text block by using the text indent property. So we are using the text indent and then the size. Again in here, this size is a value or percentage of the font size of the text on the affected lines. If there is no unit specified, the size value represents the ratio of the line height, which the default is 1.2 or 1.2 EM, so that the line height is 20% larger than the font size. And in the text spacing, that size is expressed in absolute or relative unit, or also a percentage. For instance, an indentation value of 5% indents the first line by 5% of the width of the block. The indentation value also can be negative, extending the first line to the left of the text block to create a hanging indent. So that's where we can use the size as well as absolute or relative units. So again, another example here, we are using the EM for the line height. And for the text size, we can use again EM. As we can see, text indent, column 1 EM. So again, in this example, we have how to control the letter spacing. We put 0.1 EM, sets the space between the letters to 0.1 EM. And the line height double spaces the list of hypertext links because we are using 2 EM. So that's how you can actually use it in your documents. So the other thing that we are going to talk about is working with font styles. You can combine most of the text and font style into font property. So to specify the font style, we can use this syntax: font style column type, where this type is basically could be normal, italic, or oblique. To change the width of the font, we can use the font width and column width, where the width is the level of bold formatting that can be applied to the text. So that's the level of the bold formatting. We can also combine all the text formatting into a single style. In here, we have basically we have the font style, font variant, font weight, font size, line height, font family. So we have combined all of these text formatting into one style, which is very useful when we are doing our CSS. So the footer address for the footer of our paragraph, we have the font normal, small cap, so that's the variant, the font width, the size, and then the height and font family times serif. So that's what we can actually combine all of the into one. We can apply decorative features to the text using the text decoration type syntax, where type is could be non-underline, overline, or line through. To transform text, we can use this syntax: text transform type, where the type can be capitalized, uppercase, lowercase, or as well none. And finally, CSS supports variation of the text using the font variant type, where type could be normal or a small cap. And small caps normally is being used in the software documents, such as software agreements or something like that, some kind of a formal legal documents, in which the capital letters indicates the importance of a phrase or points. So we can use this in those type of documents. And the last thing that we are going to cover, basically, we can use the web font available from the internet. So let's look at this. Remember, when we are using web font, we have to put @font face, and then the font family, the URL that you are getting it. All of these you can put in there, the format, and then again the font family, the Nobel, regular, Verda, Geneva, and sans serif. So all of them, you can use them from the web that are available on the internet as well, if you want to use various type of fonts and the style of it. So for this, this basically concludes our tutorial 2.1 and 2.2. So we are going to work on an exercise. So the first part of exercise, complete tutorial 2, session 2.1, and upload them as I've mentioned here. And the other part is basically you're going to follow these on these pages. And the other part is complete tutorial 2, session oh sorry, this is 2.2, and upload the TSS styler. So you have to follow the tutorial on session 2.2 from the first one until the last, and then upload it, upload the CSS file. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed this week's lecture. Please let me know if you have any problems, comments, or anything. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.